with a deadly game inside the Scott Peterson investigation, part 9. Bear with me a moment. Inside, I don't want that happening. Okay. Why can't my picture come up anymore? Okay. Whatever. Let's just get right into it. All right. So last we left off, the author was delving into the coroner's finding of what happened to the baby, and it was graphic and it was sad, and I had to stop short of my goal in terms of what page I wanted to stop reading at. It just got too deep and heavy for me, but I'm okay now, so we're going to continue. A YouTuber just sent me a link to a book, and I read the first sentence of that book, and I wanted to go live and begin reading that one. I'm like, you know what? I got 2 books going now that I have not finished one of them yet. So that's going to have to hold off. And then I got the Barge book somebody been asking me for months to get to. But there's a long list of books. But that's okay. We just have not much more to go. We have about a good, you can say 100 pages to read. And then the rest is more pictures, but in black and white. And I will do a separate video going through those pictures. And they're pictures of documents and things like that pertaining to the case, and pictures of maps and all types of interesting things. And as I speak, I'm looking at a transcript of a recorded phone conversation between the mother and the son on January 11th, 2003. And so that's going to be interesting. Yeah, these are pictures from the evidence files from the case. So without further ado, I'm going to continue reading. Hold on, let me get some light in here. Your lamp ain't helping much. Okay. All right. Let me make sure I got the volume up. Is the volume okay? Yes, everything's good to go. All right, here we go. Detective Grogan was left with the grim task of informing Lacey's family of the discoveries. On the afternoon of Monday, April 14th, Grogan left messages for Sharon Rocha, Ron Gransky, who is Sharon Rocha's husband, and Brent Rocha, which is Lacey's brother, Sharon's son, requesting that they contact him. About 4 o'clock, he spoke to Sharon Rocha, informing her that the bodies of an adult female and an infant had been recovered from the San Francisco Bay. They had not yet been identified, but he promised to keep her updated. A little later, he relayed the same message to Lacey's brother. Around 10 o'clock that evening, Grogan contacted the family again to prepare them for breaking news reports that the female's body had no head, hands, or legs. Both Sharon and Brent asked Grogan where Scott was. He did not know. Sharon told Grogan that she'd left a message for Scott the previous day, but the call went unreturned. She then checked with Jackie Peterson, who had been trying to reach him since the previous evening and was beginning to worry. Sharon told Jackie that she thought Scott might be with family because of the news about the bodies. The press reports alone, however, weren't enough to convince Jackie that these were the bodies of Lacey and Connor. She told Sharon about another female body, similarly mutilated, that had washed up in January. That same evening, an autopsy was performed on the Jane Doe. It was in an advanced state of decomposition, missing not only its head and portions of the lower legs, but all internal organs from the abdominal cavity, except the uterus. Since no evidence of tool marks was found at the bone joints of the missing appendages, the medical examiner performing the autopsy concluded that either someone with great surgical skill had removed them, or the victim had been weighted in those areas, and then the water's currents and decomposition had caused the limbs to pull apart at the joints. The bones bore no sign of injuries that occurred before death, such as resorption lines, callus formation, or rounding of fracture margins. However, Dr. Peterson found that the woman's fifth, sixth, and ninth ribs were broken. The fracturing appeared to have occurred shortly before her death. Wow. Jane Doe's missing limbs suggested that the body had been in the water a long time. The corpse also showed signs of extensive fish activity. In foraging on human remains, fish start by eating exposed areas of soft tissue that are unprotected by clothing. Once the exterior flesh has been eaten away, they will swim up sleeves or through other gaps in clothing and often find their way into the chest cavity and consume the internal organs. In a subsequent review of the autopsy at my request, San Antonio's chief coroner, Dr. Vincent DeMaio, confirmed the Contra Costa coroner's findings and theorized that the fractures were most likely sustained around the time the woman died. It appeared that they were the result of one violent blow, such as a kick to the left side of the rib cage. The injuries could have been the result of similar violence to the body shortly after death, but simply dropping the body or transit would not likely result in such breaks. While the body could have been identified as Lacey Peterson by the tattoo on her left ankle, a missing ovary removed when she was a child, or the abdominal scar from the surgery, the state of decomposition eliminated these possibilities. Dental records were useless because the head was absent. The body did not have an enlarged uterus, which signaled her pregnancy, but there was no the body did have an enlarged uterus, which signaled her pregnancy, but there was no physical evidence of a vaginal delivery. One moment, please. I'm back. I'm sorry. The fact that the woman had been wearing underpants supported this theory, he noted. The cervix and area below the belly button were intact, and there was no sign of a man made incision to remove the baby. Yet, a tear in the body's abdominal wall was large enough to permit the fetus to exit the womb through it, as interior pressure from bacteria and gases built up inside the mother, a sad phenomenon known as coffin birth. In his confidential report, Dr. Peterson noted that the condition of the female's body was consistent with an exposure of 3 to 6 months in a marine environment. There were barnacles adhering to the exposed skeleton. Some of the deep muscle tissue was still red, indicating that decomposition had not progressed completely through the remains. The cold temperatures of the San Francisco Bay had slowed the decomposition process. A toxicology examination of the woman's tissue revealed no illicit drugs or poison, only elevated levels of caffeine and PEA, a product of decomposition. As with baby doe, the autopsy alone could not determine the cause of death. A large plastic bag bearing the logo of a company called Target Products Ltd. also washed up in the area where the two bodies came ashore. It had a piece of silver duct tape wrapped around it. The police recovered the bag and used the internet to identify Target Products as a Canadian company. The owner said that the bag sounded like what they used to cover the pallets of their product, concrete grout used in bridge construction. They were currently shipping material to the San Francisco Bay Area for projects, including the Richmond Bridge. After the bodies were found, the detectives also began recovering flyers that had been posted about Scott Peterson. They wanted to know if he had used duct tape to affix them, if the brand matched the strip on the woman's body, and if the adhesive of the tape could be linked to a substance on the hairs found in Scott's boat. At 5:50 that evening, police received a call from a woman reporting a suspicious incident. And while she and her husband were dining at a restaurant called Skates over the weekend, the couple noticed something unusual in the bay through the restaurant's window. It looked like a excuse me. It looks like a dark brown or black hair bobbing up and down with the waves about 150 feet from the water's edge. She said the hair did not appear to be attached to a person, which was the reason she didn't report it. It wasn't until hearing the news that police had recovered a headless body at Point Isabel, about 3 miles north of the restaurant, that she realized the incident might be significant. Christine Crawford and her certified cadaver dog, Dakota, arrived at the scene at 6:30 in the evening. Dakota, a 6-year-old pit bull terrier, was a seasoned investigator who had taken part in 60 searches since being certified. A second dog, Merlin, and her handler, Eloise Anderson, were also called in to search the southern portion of the beach. When Dakota and Christine Crawford started traveling north along the shoreline, Dakota hit on a piece of fabric tightly wedged between two boulders. In almost the same area, she showed interest in the breeze, which was blowing onto the shore in an easterly direction. Dakota walked into the water, but was forced to stop when it reached her shoulders. Investigators flagged the spot for future reference. As they were wrapping up the search, an unidentified woman told the officers she had spotted a tarp in another area of the beach. However, follow-up using the cadaver dog indicated no ties to the body. The police also found pieces of duct tape stuck to some of the rocks in the area, and one officer located a dense metal rod that was wrapped in duct tape. Although the rod broke into pieces when he attempted to dislodge it from the rocks, he kept it as evidence. As Grogan was overseeing police activity on the shoreline, Detective Brocchini was searching for Scott. It was likely he had quit driving his white 2002 Dodge Dakota truck with its GPS tracking system because he suspected that he was being followed. Scott had apparently traded vehicles with his brother John. Agents were watching his parents' house, his father's business, and an address in San Diego where the Dodge truck was parked. At one point in the evening, Lee and Jackie Peterson left their residence in Jackie's 1998 Jaguar. Scott was not with them. On Wednesday, April 16th, around 9 a.m., Brocchini finally located Scott through wiretaps on his cell phone. Peterson was checking his voicemail from 3949 La Cresta Avenue in San Diego. Surveillance units were immediately dispatched to the location, which was a house belonging to his sister, Ann Bird's adoptive parents. Scott was staying there with Ann's permission and using their Lexus instead of his Mercedes-Benz. 45 minutes later, Brocchini got word that Scott was walking around the neighborhood. An agent reported that his appearance had changed considerably since she last seen him in February 2003. He had grown a thick goatee and bleached his hair, eyebrows, and a beard blonde with an orange tint. The female agent noted that he appeared to be walking in the surrounding areas through alleys with no apparent place to go. About 11 o'clock, the agent called back and reported that Scott knew he was being watched. At one point, he disappeared into an alley, and as she pulled away from the curb in an attempt to locate him, she saw him at the corner watching her. And as she drove by, he smiled at her and shook his head. He also went up to a surveillance vehicle, asking the driver, "What agency are you with? Are you state or local?" He was obviously writing down the vehicle license plate numbers as well. Eventually, Scott returned to the residence, but agents discontinued their surveillance around 5:30 when they realized that he'd slipped away again, this time probably by motorcycle. Meanwhile, police learned that the unusable DNA samples had been extracted from the bone and tissue recovered from both bodies, and results could be expected the following day. Based on that information, Detective Grogan was finally able to obtain an arrest warrant for Scott Peterson. Now, all he needed was his suspect. During my interview with Ann Bird, she revealed that she was the one who alerted Scott to the discovery of the bodies. She was en route to the Round Table Pizza Parlor in San Pablo with her kids when her husband Tim called with the news. Ann immediately dialed Scott to see if he knew. And when she told him that the body of a woman had washed up, he reacted coolly. "They'll find it's not Lacey and keep looking," she said. Later, when she told him about the baby, though he grew very angry, "How could anyone do this?" he asked. Later, when prosecutors asked Ann to characterize Scott's reaction, did his anger seem to come from pain, frustration, pure rage? She responded without hesitation that his anger seemed a result of being discovered. Interestingly, I really need to stop and get some water. Bear with me 1 second. Need to get some water. Be right back. Okay, I'm back. Doing all this reading, boy, makes your mouth and your throat kind of dry. Okay, where was I? Interestingly, Scott had stayed with Anne for about 10 days before the bodies washed up. She also supplied him with a key to her parents' house in San Diego and to their 3-story cabin in Lake Arrowhead. Anne found out later that Scott was using both places regularly without asking. Sometimes he let her know where he was by speaking in code. I'm at Uncle Jim's cabin, he would say, or it's busy, meaning that someone else was there with him. Unbeknownst to the media, prosecutors intended to call Anne to testify, among other things, but Scott's visits and his revelation that he had borrowed a shovel from the cabin that he never returned. He never explained to Anne why he needed the shovel, but she knows that he also had access to a secret room in the basement of the Lake Arrowhead house, where a hidden door set flush with the wall led to a storage space and woodpile. Anne, who alerted Scott to the room when he needed to build a fire in the cabin, told me that she never looked in the secret space after Scott stayed there, but thought it a good spot to bury something, like jewelry. During our interview, Anne also detailed her brother's stay with her family. When he first arrived, she was convinced of his innocence and was angry with police and Sharon Rocha for insinuating otherwise. She told me he started out as a great house guest. One night, Scott insisted on making homemade spaghetti sauce after she pulled out a canned version. "Why are you using that?" he asked. "I know how to make homemade sauce. It's easy. You just crush tomatoes." With that, he grabbed the car keys and headed to the store for fresh ingredients. Though Anne was pleased at his helpfulness, she was also curious about his high spirits during such a tragic time. Her story recalled Scott's odd behavior on Christmas Day, when he invited his neighbor, Karen Service, to dinner, offering to prepare her a separate meal of tortellini less than 24 hours after Lacey went missing. During the visit, however, Anne grew increasingly uncomfortable with her brother's behavior and began keeping notes. While searching for Lacey, Anne and 2 male friends took Scott to a local bar called the Ballast Pub. When one of the men asked Scott if he killed his wife, he responded, "No, I loved my wife," speaking of Lacey in the past tense. And when Anne and Scott paired up for a game of pool, she said he remembered him getting angry when they lost the game. Later that night, after speaking with Scott at their house, one of Anne's friends decided he was guilty. Scott had made a big fuss over one of the men's cars, a Ferrari, and was drinking heavily, mixed drinks, wine, and fancy concoctions in a martini glass. Another time, Anne and Scott were at the local yacht club. Anne's mother was babysitting and had insisted that she be home by 9:30 p.m. She kept trying to get Scott to leave, but he ignored her pleas and continued to order drinks. He was being totally inconsiderate, she recalled. All those subtle signs of trouble were eclipsed, however, when those bodies washed up close to her Berkeley home. The following day, April 18th, Sergeant Carter and Detectives Beulah, Grogan, and Brocchini drove to San Diego in unmarked vehicles to assist in Scott's arrest. Arriving at 4 a.m., they checked into the Best Western Escondido Motel. And even though they had a signed warrant, they wanted to wait for the DNA results before attempting an arrest. Once Scott was located, he would simply be watched pending those results, unless he headed for the Mexican border. Brocchini remained in contact with surveillance agents as well as the wire room where calls were tracked. Ernie Lamone of the Department of Justice had picked up their suspect early that morning, leaving 377 Lytham Glen in Escondido in a dark red 1984 Mercedes Benz. He lost him briefly, but with air support had him back in sight. Scott seemed to know he was being trailed and was driving in a manner commonly referred to as counter surveillance. He got onto a freeway, immediately got off, and then abruptly re entered once again. Agents noticed he was talking on his cell phone at the time. And while driving in the high speed lane of the freeway, Scott suddenly pulled over to the shoulder lane and stopped momentarily, almost causing a collision with members of the Department of Justice team. Scott then continued northbound into the city of Solano Beach, where his parents lived. He continued driving erratically through the residential area of Santa Fe, traveling on roads that were lined with leafy trees that created a canopy and shielded the Mercedes Benz from the air. He drove near his parents' residence but never turned on their street. He made sudden stops and U turns and drove at a high rate of speed through the hills. At one point, agents saw him display his middle finger as he drove by. And as he raced along, Scott called his brother Joe. He said he couldn't join Joe at the golf course that morning because he was being followed by private investigators. He explained that he'd lost them and then another set got him. Well, where you at? Are you? Well, I don't want to ask you that, I guess, Joe said. I'm on Genesee. These guys, they know I'm on to them, Scott said. He told Joe he'd stop on the highway and they stopped behind him. I think I'd better skip it because I don't think I want a picture of me in the press playing golf. I saw the picture where everybody is leaving flowers and stuffed animals and everything in front of your house, Joe said. Oh, yeah? Yeah, Joe confirmed. Any indication when they may identify these bodies? No, there's so much hype out there. It's just insane. Yeah, it's bad. I've also heard that they can identify them pretty darn quick. 2 or 3 days, Joe said. Yeah, they know it's not her, Scott replied. Yeah, that's what I think. I think they know already, or they are telling them to retest them. I don't know. Oh, I think they're just holding off because they don't know anymore, Scott replied. Who is it? Yeah, that could be. That could be. Have fun, guys, Scott said. Sorry, bro. It's not your fault. Thanks for the thought, though. Just before 8:30 a.m., agents chased Scott back onto the I-5 freeway northbound. Suddenly, he cut across 4 lanes of traffic and abruptly left the highway. The agents followed him off and then kept up with him when he re-entered unexpectedly. They saw him clap his hands, apparently applauding them for their efforts. What a piece of cake this fool is. Scott's game continued. Just after 11 o'clock, the media was reporting that DNA results would soon confirm the bodies as those of Lacey and Connor Peterson, and that Scott Peterson's arrest was imminent. And detectives now feared that these reports might cause Scott to attempt an escape. Furthermore, his continued erratic driving could endanger members of the DOJ team or the public. Stop and arrest him, Grogan instructed Lamone. Lamone and his team followed Scott west on Carmel Mountain Road and then south on South Camino del Mar, which becomes Torrey Pines Road. As they approached the Torrey Pines Golf Club, Lamone switched on his flashing blue and red police lights. Scott immediately pulled over to the right. Officers wearing dark jackets with yellow letters identifying them as police jumped out of their vehicles and ordered Scott to turn off the ignition and get out of the car. Scott was dressed in a blue sweater worn over a white polo shirt, white shorts, ankle-high socks, and Nike tennis shoes. Dark sunglasses shaded his eyes, and he wore no jewelry, not even a wedding ring. His hair, eyebrows, and beard were all dyed an orangey blonde color. Scott offered no resistance as police handcuffed him. And after asking what agency they were with, he followed with a second question. Have they found my wife and son? One officer said someone would talk to him about that shortly and directed him to sit on the curb, away from public view. Do you know why you're being detained and arrested? Agent Lamone asked. Peterson replied, because of my erratic driving? That wasn't the reason, he was told. Did he know of any other? Well, Modesto wants me about a murder. Wow. At 11:15, the Modesto investigators arrived at the scene. Scott was placed in the rear of a Ford Taurus station wagon that police had parked a short distance away. Detective Grogan placed a tape recorder on the seat, stating the date and time. April 18th, 2003, 11:35, 11:36 hours. He formally notified Scott that, pursuant to a warrant, he was under arrest for the crime of murder. He asked Scott if he had any questions. Scott said no. As Scott and Grogan were transported to a DOJ office, a tape recorder captured their conversation. Grogan asked who should be notified about picking up the Mercedes-Benz after it was searched. While there was a certificate of title and other documentation in the car, it had not been registered to anyone's name. This prevented police from simply checking the license plate to locate the owner. A double-edged knife in a case was found along the left side of the driver's seat, along with the driver's license issued to Scott's brother John. Scott's newly lightened hair was a close match to John's photo on his license. During a more thorough search of the Mercedes-Benz over a 3-day period, police found the following. U.S. currency totaling $14,932 with $100 bills, still wrapped in paper bands from the bank. 3 credit cards, 2 in Scott's name and 1 in the name of his half-sister Ann Bird. A Columbia foul-weather jacket, a hand shovel, a backpack containing a water purifier, water bottle, climbing rope, fillet knife, roll of duct tape, cooking grill, rain pants, Ziploc bags, extra socks, fire starters, camp kit with cooking utensils, leather gloves, 2 folding knives, a folding saw, 1 pair of scissors, 2 packs of razor blades, and a waterproofing spray, a camp axe, hammock, binoculars, mask and snorkel, fishing rod and reel, and a Leatherman tool. 12 pairs of shoes ranging from flip-flops to waterproof boots to dress shoes, and an entire wardrobe including numerous pants, shirts, jackets, underwear, socks, neckties, sweaters, and a cowboy hat were all packed into the car. 16 music CDs and 2 California guidebooks, 24 blister packs of sleeping pills, 12 tablets of Viagra. Well, you're always going to need Viagra wherever you go, no matter what the situation is, right? 4 cell phones. 4 cell phones. A gas credit card in his mother's name and a quantity of Mexican currency were also found. This fool was headed to the border. As many observed after the arrest, it was evident that Scott was going somewhere for quite a while. One destination might have been the nearby Mexican border, and he was familiar with that country. His supporters would argue he was simply trying to hide out from the press for a while. But as I pointed out at the time, Scott's friends and relatives had kept him concealed from the cameras in their homes for some time. The items in the car indicated to me that Scott had packed for more than a camping trip. At 12:05, Scott was brought into a large training room in the DOJ office. He complained that his shoulders ached from having his hands cuffed behind him and asked if they can be loosened. Grogan left the room and returned with a waist chain and cuffs. He read Scott his constitutional rights. Scott nodded his head, affirming that he understood, but said nothing. Grogan told Scott that he could be booked into San Diego County or, if he waived the right, in Stanislaus County. Scott said he wanted to speak with his attorney before answering. He also wanted to use the telephone. Grogan informed him that he could make 3 calls, but first he had to be photographed. And when Scott was given a phone, he immediately dialed his attorney, but was only able to leave a voicemail message. Next, he called his mother and told her that he had been arrested. His third call, bizarrely, was to Heather and Mike Richardson. "Hey, this is Scott. I just wanted to make sure I returned your call," Scott reportedly said. "I made you some lavender cookies. That is what I was going to send, but I got arrested a couple of hours ago, so I have to go." Heather later reported that Scott had called the day before to get her mailing address so he could send the cookies. Lacey used to bake them regularly using dried lavender flower petals. She also recounted her call to Scott on April 16th to see how he was doing. The bodies had been recovered by that time, and she wanted to hear what Scott might say about the discovery. But she didn't ask about the bodies, and amazingly, Scott didn't mention them either. Instead, he talked of traveling to Arizona and New Mexico to post flyers about Lacey's disappearance. By this time, there were more signs that Scott Peterson was experiencing serious psychological dysfunction. Scott would not be examined and psychiatric testimony would not be permitted during the trial, but there was increasing public conversation about Scott's flat affect and arguably inappropriate responses to unfolding events. Months after Lacey's brother had actually confronted Scott about his behavior, calling him a sociopath, that description will resonate publicly as people learned more about the seemingly charming young man's psyche. Scott asked police if he could make one more call, and when Grogan asked who he wanted to contact, he said his work, to tell them he wouldn't be coming in. Grogan told him he would have the opportunity to make that call later. Detective Grogan left the room for a few minutes. DOJ agent Charles Wilcombe remained with their charge. Suddenly, Scott, who was still wearing sunglasses, turned to him and said, "I want to apologize for the way I was driving this morning. I didn't know who you guys were." "Thank you, but I wasn't with the team that followed you," Wilcombe replied. "Oh," Scott said, "okay, I just wanted to apologize." The conversation rambled for a while. Then, looking at his watch, Scott noted, "I was supposed to take my niece to the movies in a couple of hours today." He paused, then added, "Well, maybe in a couple of weeks I'll be able to do that." Wilcombe would record that Scott did not seem worried or overly concerned that he had been arrested. Peterson's demeanor was calm, devoid of grief, concern, or anger. Most of the time, Peterson displayed a distant state. A, I'm sorry. Most of the time, Peterson displayed a distant stare toward the wall across from where he sat and occasionally smiled while talking to me. Late that afternoon, Scott was placed in leg irons and waist chains, in addition to the handcuffs. Detectives Grogan and Bueller then put him in a car for the ride to the Stanislaus County Jail, and the vehicle was wired with transmitters in the trunk to record any conversation. Brocchini and Carter followed in a separate car, monitoring those transmissions. At 5:20, as they were driving back to Modesto, Grogan received a call informing him that the DNA results were complete. Jane Doe had been identified as Lacey Peterson, and baby Doe was indeed Scott's biological child. Investigators had compared DNA from the muscle and bone samples from the autopsy to DNA from Lacey's mother and father, Sharon and Dennis Rocha. They had also taken 8 hairs from a brush that had belonged to Lacey, and as well as a pap smear they obtained from her gynecologist. They also had a blood sample from Scott Peterson, which they used to identify the fetus. The law required that the next of kin be notified. Scott Peterson was that person. Because of the highway noise and the concern that it would mask any response Scott made upon hearing of the news, Grogan opted to postpone the notification. At 6:50 p.m., the detective told Scott that the bodies found in the San Francisco Bay had been identified as Lacey and Connor through DNA match. Pulling the sunglasses from his eyes, he bowed his head. Grogan saw a tear run down the side of his face. Scott wiped it away and closed his eyes. He put his sunglasses back on, his eyes still shut. He did not utter a sound, but Grogan saw no more tears. 15 minutes later, Bueller asked Scott if he wanted any water or food. He declined. After 8 o'clock, the officers stopped at In-N-Out Burger in Bakersfield. By then, Scott was ready for a double cheeseburger, fries, and a vanilla shake. While seated in the car with Grogan, waiting for Brokini and Carter to return with food, Scott commented on a woman carrying a small child wrapped in a blanket to the car parked in front of them. Scott remarked that the baby appeared to be only about a month old. After making the observation, he fell silent again. Grogan had requested that Scott be booked in an undisclosed location to thwart media coverage, but en route to Modesto, he learned that arrangements had been made for a single pool camera to be set up inside the gate at the jail. Scott will be booked there. Just before midnight, the group pulled into the facility. Scott was escorted into the jail in full view of the camera. On the second floor, he was booked according to standard procedure and charged with 2 counts of 187 PC, murder in the first degree. With the incredible publicity surrounding Scott's arrest, new tips began coming into police headquarters. One such call came from Miguel Espedia of Redwood City, who said he'd been a classmate of Scott and Lacey at Cal Poly. Upon reading a newspaper article that mentioned Lacey's headless body, he recalled a conversation he said he had with Scott back in 1995. Espedia couldn't remember how the conversation started, but he and Scott were driving in a car when Scott began describing how he might kill someone. He said he would wrap their head in a plastic bag and weight it down. He would throw the body into salt water so that the salt and the fish would eat away at the fingers, destroying the fingerprints. If you weighted the head, he said, the body would float upward. The fish and salt would eat away at the neck, eventually separating the head from the body. And if a body were found without fingerprints or a head, Scott thought it could not be identified. Scott assured him that he would never do such a thing. Espedia said these were just his thoughts. Let me ask you a question. Do you ever sit around and think of ways how you might kill someone and get away with it? I've never had that conversation with someone. I've never had such thoughts. I've never had such creative thoughts on how to murder someone and get rid of the evidence. These are not normal thoughts to have, and it's not a normal conversation to have with someone. Detective Brocchini would later testify about this call at trial. As he described the tip, he mentioned wrapping the head with duct tape as one of the things Scott described to Espadilla. Since the report had actually said nothing about duct tape, Mark Geragos, that's Scott's lawyer, climbed all over the detective, accusing him of embellishing the story to make it an exact fit with the Peterson facts. Brocchini would later say he hadn't refreshed his memory about the tip before testifying and was simply confused. But Geragos scored points with trial watchers. Although it was a minor infraction, this was one of the several embarrassing mistakes that would damage Brocchini's credibility during the trial. While going through the property seized after Scott's arrest, Detective Bueller came across a tiny scrap of paper with a woman's name and phone number. The name, Natalie Mangura, matched that of a woman who had phoned the tip line the previous night. The 28-year-old Mangura told Bueller that she'd been house sitting at the home of Ann Bird's parents in San Diego, and she knew that Scott was there on April 18th, just hours before his arrest. She first encountered Peterson on Monday evening, April 14th, at about 11 p.m., when she arrived to find a two-door reddish Mercedes-Benz parked in front of the house. As she entered the house, she yelled, "Is anybody home?" Scott Peterson answered. Natalie had been advised that Scott might be staying at the residence temporarily, but she hadn't expected him until the following week. He quickly told her he could sleep downstairs and she could stay upstairs. Uncomfortable when he insisted, Natalie told Scott that she didn't need to stay overnight since the family cat had died. "Did you kill the cat?" Scott smiled. "No," she explained. "The cat had died of natural causes." Before leaving, she gave Scott her cell phone number and asked that he contact her when he was leaving so she could resume her duties. Natalie reported that Scott had been preparing his taxes when she arrived that night. She later learned from Ann that he used one of the homeowner's cars, a Lexus, to mail his taxes so that he wouldn't be recognized by the media or investigators. Several days later, police received additional information about the Mercedes-Benz Scott was driving when he was arrested. Michael Griffin, a substitute teacher, had advertised a 1984 Mercedes-Benz in Auto Trader magazine asking $5,000 for the car. On April 12th, Scott Peterson responded to the ad and showed up to test drive the automobile. He then offered $3,600 cash and Griffin agreed. Scott left, returning just 10 minutes later with 36 $100 bills. Scott produced the necessary DMV forms downloaded from the internet. And when Griffin examined them, he noticed that they'd been filled out in the name of Jacqueline Peterson. He questioned this, yet Scott insisted it was correct. It was kind of a boy named Sue type name, Scott claimed. "That's what my parents stuck me with." He added that he went by the name Jack. You see how his mama was helping him? Griffin told police that Scott appeared to be in a hurry. He could not produce any idea. I'm sorry. He couldn't produce any ID, but did recite what he claimed was a Florida driver's license number. At trial, Griffin told the court that the double-edged dagger found in the car when Scott was arrested actually belonged to him. He had forgotten to remove it when Scott took the car, but the balance of the very long list of recovered items belonged to Scott. Police interviewed a second man, mechanic Mario Ruvalcaba, who said that a man named Scott had called him from a cell phone with an 858 area code about his car ad in the Auto Trader. The two arranged a meeting at Ruvalcaba's place of business. Scott was a tall white guy, about 30 years old, with blonde hair and a goatee, Ruvalcaba recalled. After the test drive, Scott said, "Fine, I'll take it right now." He seemed anxious to get the car and said he would pay cash. "We filled out all of the paperwork," Ruvalcaba continued. "I noticed that he put Jacqueline Peterson on everything. I didn't see the name Scott anywhere, and I thought maybe he was gay or transsexual and that Jacqueline was his female name. And there was one problem," Ruvalcaba needed to get Scott a copy of the smog certificate for the vehicle and postponed the deal until 8 o'clock the following morning. In the meantime, Ruvalcaba called another prospective buyer to let her know the car might be sold. The woman cried and carried on so much that Ruvalcaba agreed to sell it to her instead. I phoned Scott to tell him that the deal was off, and he was really angry. He accused me of wasting his time. Later that day, Scott returned to Ruvalcaba's shop. "I have the cash. I'll take the car right now," Scott announced. Ruvalcaba told him no, but Scott continued to push. After leaving, he phoned the shop again and said, "Are we dealing or not?" Very firmly, Ruvalcaba again said no. On April 21st, District Attorney Jim Brazelton, members of his staff, and investigators from the Modesto Police Department met with the Rocha family prior to Scott's arraignment. The district attorney informed them what to expect going forward. He could never have imagined the media firestorm that would rage throughout the proceedings. At 1:30 that afternoon, Scott stood impassively before the Honorable Judge Nancy Ashley of the Stanislaus County Superior Court. He was clean-shaven, yet his thick hair was still a strawberry blonde. His face revealed nothing as the charges were read. On or about and between December 23rd, 2002 and December 24th, 2002, defendant did commit a felony murder violation of Section 187 of the California Penal Code, in that the defendant did willfully, unlawfully, and feloniously, and with malice, aforethought murder Lacey Denise Peterson, a human being. It is further alleged as to count one murder that the defendant acted intentionally, deliberately, and with premeditation. He was also charged with a second count of murder for the death of the unborn Connor Peterson. Scott responded with 4 words: "I am not guilty." The charge carried a special enhancement under California law, alleging that he deliberately killed Lacey and her unborn child with premeditation. The combination of charges meant that Scott was not eligible for bail, and if found guilty, he could face the death penalty. During the proceeding, Scott was assigned a public defender, even though McAllister had accompanied him to court. It would be another month before Mark Geragos took the case. Outside the courtroom, McAllister would not discuss why he was no longer representing Scott, and some pundits speculated that the reason was financial. Hey, Sassy. Following the arraignment, the Rocha family held an emotional press conference. With tears streaming down her face, Sharon praised the Modesto police. She recalled that from the moment she received Scott's Christmas Eve phone call, "I knew in my heart something terrible had happened to Lacey and her son. My world collapsed around me. She said that Lacey's killer should be held accountable and punished for the tragedy and devastation forced upon so many of us. I can only hope that the sound of Lacey's voice begging for her life, begging for the life of her unborn child, is heard over and over and over again in the mind of that person every day for the rest of his life. Ron Gransky added, I feel sorry for Jackie and Lee. They don't deserve this, but our family didn't either. As Scott was led back to jail, police continued their interviews. Mike Richardson had been seen on television discussing Scott's new hair color, so he got another call. Mike explained that he had invited Scott to his ranch in Fillmore about 3 weeks earlier. When Scott arrived, Mike immediately noticed the color change. Scott said that he'd been swimming in his friend Aaron's pool in Mountain View, and the chlorine had bleached his hair. Mike didn't ask any more questions, but he was skeptical. And this information prompted police to obtain a search warrant for hair samples and full body photographs and to test whether hair dye or pool chemicals lightened Scott's hair. Additionally, Heather Richardson told detectives that during her conversation with Scott, he admitted to an affair with a woman in San Luis Obispo while Lacey was living in Prunedale. Although he did not name her, it was probably Janet Ilse, the woman who'd walked in on Scott and Lacey in bed those many years ago. However, it might have been Katie Hansen, who was sitting next to Scott at graduation when a pretty brunette walked over and presented him with that flowered lei and a big kiss. Whichever girl it was, Scott seemed surprised that Lacey hadn't told her. Heather also recalled an argument between Scott and Lacey after Scott's graduation from Cal Poly. She and Mike had attended a celebratory dinner with the couple afterward. Heather could tell that Lacey was upset. And when they left the restaurant, everyone drove to the house Scott was sharing with his 3 roommates. Lacey and Scott went into the bedroom. Heather overheard her yelling at him. Scott did not respond. It sounded like he was just taking it in, Heather said. Lacey never explained why the two were arguing, but at the graduation ceremony, she commented that Scott had been living with the guys and acting single. Still, even if Lacey knew about that affair, Heather did not believe she was told about Amber Fry. Police also interviewed Jim Allen, the manager of the Torrey Pines Golf Club, where Scott had told police he was heading when he was arrested. Although Scott did not have a tee time reserved, said Allen, Lee Peterson was in the book for April 18th for a foursome at 8 o'clock in the morning. Only 3 golfers showed up that day, and Allen added another lone golfer to round out the group. Detective Grogan also spoke to a technician, Denise Ducott, who said she worked with Kim McGregor at Valley Oak Pediatrics Center. According to Ducott, another coworker told her that McGregor was claiming a sexual interlude with Scott Peterson after Lacey disappeared. The police found no further evidence of such a liaison. In a similar vein, police also learned of a stripper at a club in San Diego who claimed to have had a short affair with Scott. The day before his arrest, she said, he asked her to run off to Mexico with him. Police thought the information was credible, but the woman was fearful of recrimination at work if she came forward. Such leads appeared to corroborate the detective's suspicion that Scott was planning to leave the country. Scott simply may have waited too long to get away because he did not expect the DNA identification of the bodies to occur so quickly. On Friday, April 25th, Deputy District Attorney Dave Harris and Detective Groening met with members of Lacey's family at Sharon Roach's home to discuss the death penalty. Dennis, Sharon, Brent, and Amy Rocha, Ron Gransky, and family representative Kim Peterson all supported the death penalty as punishment if Scott was found guilty. During the meeting, Sharon mentioned Heather Richardson's recollection that Scott had once expressed that he didn't want to have children. Days later, she heard Heather tell a TV reporter that Scott was looking forward to being a father, and then read the same comment in the Modesto Bee. Sharon told Grogan that the family was planning to hold a memorial service for Lacey and Connor on Lacey's birthday, May 4th, at 3 p.m. at the First Baptist Church in Modesto. Ron Gransky later contacted the detective saying the family had learned that Amber's sister, Ava, and her mother, Brenda McKee, intended to show up. The family didn't want them there, and Ron asked Grogan to relay the information. While the family was very appreciative of the way Amber had handled her involvement, they feared her presence would sensationalize the solemn occasion. He also asked that Amber not attend. And after the family meeting, District Attorney James Brazelton called a press conference to announce that a decision has been made to seek the death penalty in the case of the people of California versus Scott Peterson. Publicly, Lacey's family had no comment. On April 29th, Grogan received a call from Rick DiStasso, the public defender's officer who had just informed DiStasso that defense attorney Mark Geragos had agreed to take Scott Peterson's case pro bono. Geragos would be arriving on May 2nd, and all legal issues, upcoming motions, and the sealing of search warrants were on hold until then. While there was no question that Geragos was taking the case, it was unclear whether he had agreed to represent Scott free of charge. It has never been entirely clear what the financial arrangements were. Geragos repeatedly declined to disclose how much he was charging the family, but later told colleagues that he took the case for a flat fee. The figure that circulated was $1 million, but that amount has never really been confirmed. On Larry King Live the following evening, the flashy defense counselor was a calling guest. Although he declined to reveal whether he had agreed to take the case, he indicated that he'd met the players and was seriously considering it. I can tell you that Scott's mother, especially, is a very compelling advocate for her son. I'm pausing because I really want to cuss about this woman and this statement this lawyer just made, but I'll pass. Geragos told King, and I've met with Scott and I've talked with the public defenders. I was up in Modesto yesterday and I'm going to sleep on it and make a decision. Mark, can you give us the balancing points? What's for and what's against? King asked. Well, for one thing, Geragos conceded, I think he's already universally convicted in the court of public opinion. I don't think there's anybody that you can talk to that doesn't just assume his guilt. But the attorney noted that part of why people go into criminal defense is to defend the underdog and try to make it a truly adversarial system, and that is definitely intriguing in this case. So what's the downside? King asked. Well, the downside is that it's a monumental undertaking in terms of time, number one, and effort, and I suppose as well the other clients and the impact of the other lawyers in my practice. And there's a whole lot of other factors, others that I won't even get into on the air. When pressed, Geragos did claim that he was tremendously impressed by Scott, and obviously that's something that leans towards me taking the case as well. At one point in the program, the show was opened up to callers. To the surprise of many, Lee Peterson phoned in to confront legal analyst Nancy Grace, a passionate believer in Scott's guilt. The exchange was heated with a lot of crosstalk. Nancy Grace, he said, I've watched many programs. I don't like to watch them, but it kind of keeps me informed and I can feel the public sentiment. And I just have to say, for some reason, you seem to have a personal stake in this, a personal vendetta against my son, and I do not understand it. It is so obvious that you are just caught up in this thing, and there's no room for, innocence until proven guilty. And I'm just appalled by that. I don't think that's your place to be a spokeswoman for the district attorney. I know he may not believe it, Grace responded, but my heart goes out to Lee and the pain his family's having. But I'm speaking on behalf of what I believe to be true, on behalf of Lacey Peterson, neither against Scott, for the state, against the state, but what I believe to be true regarding her murder. You are speculating on these facts as much as I am, Lee Peterson argued, and you are believing what your son is telling you. As Peterson began to respond, Grace interjected. Please don't interrupt me, Peterson asked. You've had your say here for months. You've crucified my son on national media, and he's a wonderful man. You have no idea of his background and what a wonderful son and a wonderful man he is. You have no knowledge of that, and you sit there as a judge and jury, I guess, and you're convincing him on the net, you're convicting him on the national media, and you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. Sir, I think he should be ashamed of himself as whoever is responsible for the death of Lacey Peterson, Grace responded. I'm simply stating what has been leaked or what has been put in formal documents. And if you find them disturbing, I suggest you ask your son about some of them, sir. There you go, Nancy. Look at the look on Nancy's face. You absolutely hate my son. I don't know what it is. No, I don't hate your son. I don't know your son. The argument went on for a while, but Lee continued to defend his son. You don't have any facts, he told Grace at one point. All you have is your anger and your speculation. I think you hate men. I think she hates men who murder pregnant women, if you ask me. On May 2nd, Deputy District Attorney Rick DiStasso asked investigator Kevin Bertolato to contact Kirk McAllister and ask if he had any information that might clear Scott of the murder charges. 3 days later, Bertolato encountered McAllister in the hallway of the Stanislaus County Court building. He knew McAllister from past cases and approached him with an extended hand. Good morning, Bertolato said, shaking the lawyer's hand. He then asked McAllister if he wanted to share any information that could clear Scott to the district attorney's office. Go fuck yourself, McAllister responded. Don't shoot the messenger, Bertolato replied. We've always got along good. Yeah, I know, McAllister shot back, patting the investigator on the arm. Well, take this message to whoever. Go fuck yourselves. The battle was on. Good Lord. Such language coming from attorneys. I'm up to chapter 18, titled Summer of 2003. We getting there. Might be one more video after this and we'll be done. How long have I been live? Okay, I'm going to read for about 45 more minutes. This is a short chapter, very short, like 4 or 5 pages. Yeah, and then chapter 19 is the trial. And then after that, chapter 20 is the penalty phase. That's about 10 to 12 pages. And then we have the acknowledgments and then the pictures. So we're done. We're almost done. All right. So on May 4th, 2003, thousands of friends and family members packed into the First Baptist Church in Modesto to bid farewell to Lacey and Connor. Everyone in attendance was fully aware that it would have been Lacey's 28th birthday. Scott had requested permission to attend. Not surprisingly, he was turned down. The jail arranged to beam the services into his cell. As the ceremony proceeded, it was reported that Lacey's accused killer was meeting with his attorney instead of watching the services. Although defense sources tried to dismiss this as just another attempt to portray Scott as a heartless killer. In fact, they said he and his family had their own quiet service inside the jail. Whoop-de-doo. Scott's brother Mark expressed a desire to attend Lacey's funeral, but was angrily admonished by his father. "We'll disown you if you do," Lee Peterson reportedly warned his son. Scott was under high security and in isolation because of rumored death threats. Stanislaus County Sheriff's Department spokesperson Kelly Houston confirmed. That's a strange way of spelling Houston or Huston. Anyway, confirmed this on April 21st. Some of the inmates in our facility that have nothing to lose with the 3 strikes law in California have made some mention of taking care of him, Huston said, venturing that some inmates would love the notoriety of having done something or have some attachment to this case. The fact that Scott also was charged as a baby killer increased the chances that he would be the target of violence. In the prison hierarchy, those charged with crimes against children were on the lowest rung. His 6 by 9 foot maximum security cell, outfitted with nothing but a metal bed with a 3-inch mattress and a stainless steel sink and toilet, would be his home for many months. In June 2003, Amber Fry, her lawyer Gloria Allred, and Detective Bueller went to the Stanislaus County District Attorney's office to meet with Deputy District Attorney Dave Harris for the first time. Harris, serving with Rick DiStasso as the trial prosecutors in the Peterson case, first showed Amber a courtroom so that it would seem familiar if she was called to testify at the upcoming preliminary hearing. Later in the meeting, Amber gave Bueller a photocopy of a 2-page pencil letter from Scott dated April 25th, in which he wrote that he would be acquitted of the charges and that while in custody, he would use the time to do the work of the Lord. He thanked Amber for leading him to God and apologized for the fact that she'd become embroiled in such media frenzy. He said that he was looking forward to getting the preliminary trial over with, as if he believed that the proceeding would end any suspicion that he'd been involved in Lacey's death. May 4th was Lacey's birthday, and he was asking friends to fly a kite in her memory. He extended the letter by saying that children are miracles and gifts. Only a few months earlier, Scott had told his devout girlfriend that his failure to attend church could jeopardize their relationship. During their affair, however, Scott had realized how effective a dose of religion could be in manipulating Amber. and he continued to do so from his jail cell. That's the thing about sociopaths. They're chameleons. And when they're trying to, reel you in so they can grip you like a lioness does her prey, in order to do that, they need to connect with you. Now, if you like swimming, they may not have ever been in a pool or to the beach in their life, but all of a sudden they like swimming too. They like everything that you like. They try to become everything that you are. It's very familiar here. If you are a spiritual person, next thing you know, they'll be talking about how they prayed for somebody, how they said a prayer for them. They're always mimicking the other individual. Very interesting, the sociopath. Very interesting. Amber also gave Bueller 2 emails from Scott, whose address was now purposelife2003 at yahoo.com. Purpose Life 2003. Wow. Oh my God. This guy, he is so fascinating. It's like he's just unfreaking believable. She received both of them before his arrest, but in hindsight, it seems Scott was trying to lay some good character groundwork. In the first, dated April 3rd, Scott said that he just flown a kite with his 2 nephews. In the second, received 5 days later, Scott explained that he was helping to rebuild a deck at a home for battered women. While there, he said he noticed a young man staring at him and recognized him as someone he had tutored at the St. Vincent de Paul Center for Homeless Children while he was in high school. On June 4th, the district attorney announced that the brown van rumored to belong to the real killers was not connected to the Peterson murders. Several days later, a judge issued a gag order to all parties in the case, but he also unsealed the search warrants as the press had requested. In mid-June, District Attorney Investigator Kevin Bertolato arranged to meet a man named Harvey Kemple at a McDonald's in Modesto. Related by marriage to the Rocha family, Uncle Harvey was the second person who heard Scott claim he was golfing, not fishing, on Christmas Eve. Kemple remembered remarking to his wife, "What was Scott doing golfing on Christmas Eve?" His wife, Gwen, replied, "Scott told me he went fishing." Later, the couple's daughter overheard them discussing the discrepancy and mentioned that Scott told her he'd been at work that day. A colorful character, Kemple became one of the better-known witnesses during the trial when he related a story about Scott burning the chicken he was barbecuing at a 4th of July pool party. Scott was more upset over burning the damn chicken than finding Lacey, Kemple griped. Wow. On June 26, 2003, Judge Girolami ordered that 176 recently discovered wiretaps of Scott Peterson's phone calls be handed over to the defense as part of the discovery. The recordings turned up on a computer hard drive on June 13, 2003. 5 days later, prosecutors revealed their existence when they asked the court to review them for relevance. Prosecutors maintained that no one, not even the investigator in charge of the wiretaps, had listened to the recordings. Ultimately, the judge denied the defense's request to throw out those and nearly 3 1,000 other secretly recorded conversations. On March 3rd, 2004, DeLucci ruled that the tapes would be admissible at trial. That same day, DeLucci also ruled to exclude the dog tracking evidence gathered around the couple's home and inside Scott's warehouse, striking a partial blow to the prosecutor's case. Despite calling it at best iffy, the judge did allow the trailing dog evidence from the Berkeley Marina search. The ruling was a partial victory for Garagos, who had argued that the dog gathering evidence was complete voodoo and utter nonsense. In late September, investigators returned to the San Francisco Bay to continue their search for additional evidence. In particular, they were looking for other body parts and concrete anchors. As for countless delays, the preliminary hearing in the Stanislaus County Courthouse got underway on October 29, 2003. As expected, it was a huge media event. It was the first time the public and the press got a first-hand look at many of the people they had been hearing about for months. Scott and Lacey's friends and family members, detectives, forensic experts, even the couple's housekeeper. Among those who garnered extraordinary attention was Scott's high-profile trial lawyer, Mark Geragos. Known as Susan McDougal's attorney during President Clinton's travails, he also handled Winona Ryder's shoplifting case. Ironically, Geragos represented Gary Condit during the investigation into Modesto resident Chandra Levy's disappearance and murder in Washington, D.C. Perhaps his most notorious client was pop star Michael Jackson. Geragos had been the first attorney to represent the singer in his 2003 child abuse investigation. And although Jackson would soon dismiss him, reportedly because of the attention he was giving the Peterson case. Before Scott hired Geragos, the attorney had appeared regularly on the Larry King Live to talk about the case. While he now took the role of defense attorney on the shows, Geragos still made note of critical evidence such as the computer title charts, the cell phone records, and of course, what he called the enormous coincidence that the very place that he put himself, the very alibi, if you will, turns out to be the exact place where the body is recovered. That is either an incredible coincidence or a damning piece of evidence. Is it a slam dunk? King asked his guest, Mark Geragos. Geragos didn't sound terribly bullish, even if it's a circumstantial evidence case. The most damning piece of circumstantial evidence comes out of his own mouth and his own hands when he hands the police that receipt from the very location where 2 miles away she's found, Geragos said. I mean, that is just a devastating thing. If Scott Peterson did this crime, he went on, and everybody's, innocent until proven guilty, and as I've said, it's a damning circumstantial case. The man is a sociopath if he did this crime. I mean, there's no other way to put it, Geragos told King. This is his wife, his unborn baby boy. If he's the one who took the 2 of them up there and put concrete around them and threw them into the ocean and concocted this story and went out onto Diane Sawyer and gave that impassioned plea with the tears, I mean, that's not somebody that generally you're going to want to give a manslaughter conviction to. Even though the case had first broken nearly a year earlier, public interest was escalating rather than fading. The initial fascination was understandable. the Christmas Eve disappearance of a beautiful young mother-to-be, the family's heartbreaking pleas for help, and the reticent husband with a dubious alibi all made good copy for the press. While most were skeptical of Scott's story, he was still a good-looking, white, middle-class suburban husband who seemed to have a wonderful marriage and a happy life. Interest surged when the affair with Amber Fry was revealed. And again, when the breaking news reports announced that two bodies had washed up along the shoreline, and when Lacey and Connor were identified, rumors began to circulate that Scott had slipped away from the police. His dramatic pursuit and the arrest on April 18, 2003 closed one phase of the case and opened another. Despite what Garagos acknowledged, that Scott had all but hanged himself in the court of public opinion, the state was nevertheless saddled with an almost purely circumstantial case. Many observers still asserted that the evidence was insufficient to produce a conviction. The prosecution had no DNA, no confession, and precious little crime scene forensics to work with. The preliminary hearing would be the first chance for the prosecutors to lay out their findings. It would also be the first time Mark Garagos could ask the judge to dismiss the case for lack of evidence. The hearing lasted 11 days. Prosecutors announced that they would not introduce GPS or wiretap evidence during the preliminary hearing, but did not exclude the possibility that they would offer this at trial. Nor at this stage did they intend to call Amber Fry. Garagos wanted Amber's attorney Gloria Allred barred from the proceedings. You know, Garagos and Allred, Mark Garagos and Gloria Allred, they're buddies. They just happen to be, at the opposite side of the table in this case. But they're buddies. They hang out when they have, I don't know, special events, family events like weddings or birthday parties or whatever. They all hang out together. Nothing if not feisty, Allred was not about to be removed without a fight. Judge Girolami overruled Garagos' motion, but instructed Allred not to discuss any testimony with her client. Garagos also attempted to have Allred placed under the same gag order that applied to the principal attorneys and witnesses, but to his dismay, the judge refused. On television and in print, Allred would lash out at Garagos and his client throughout the trial proceedings. But they're buddies. The prosecutor's first witness was a DNA expert, Dr. Constance Fisher, an FBI forensic analyst, testified about the hair clasped in a pair of pliers in Scott's boat. Speaking in broad terms, Fisher explained that the DNA recovered from hair with no root attached was mitochondrial, meaning that the information from this analysis would not is written wrong, meaning that the information from this analysis would not be as precise as if it had been obtained from nuclear DNA. Yet, important findings would still emerge from the genetic material. Comparing it with hairs from Lacey's brush and DNA from her mother, the experts established probability about the source of the hair. Roughly 1 in 112 individuals in the in the Modesto area would have possessed the DNA profile of the hair in question, and Lacey could not be excluded as a contributor. One person who was clearly eliminated as a match was Scott. And before she could testify about those findings, the defense team challenged the science in a three-pronged attack. Garagos attacked first the validity of the testing and then the database from which the information was drawn. Finally, he asserted that the sample was contaminated. Fisher insisted that there had been no contamination during her tests and maintained that her conclusions were accurate. The judge finally ruled that the expert's testimony was admissible and permitted her to state her conclusions. Hey, Garagos is trying. He's trying. And although he's defending Scott Peterson, hypothetically speaking, suppose Scott Peterson was innocent. You know, he would need somebody like Mark Garagos. Suppose you were innocent and committed of any type of crime that you had absolutely nothing to do with. You need attorneys like Mark Garagos. It's a hard pill to swallow. You hate them when they represent such a vile, disgusting sociopath, inhuman son of a bitch. But yet, if his client was purely innocent, an attorney like Mark Garagos is definitely needed. And so, in that vein, we have to respect and appreciate defense attorneys. Because if it wasn't for them, people can just point their finger at you or anybody and say you did something that you had nothing to do with, and your ass is thrown in the slammer for life. But that's just my take on Garagos. I happen to like him as a lawyer. I like his swag and everything. He pissed me off with this Scott Peterson thing. But hey, like I said, he's an attorney doing his job. But all in all, I like him. He tries. It may not always fly, but he's savvy and he tries. Let me get a sip of water. I'm just going to go for about 20 more minutes or until I finish this chapter, whichever comes first. And actually, I got 3 more pages to read of chapter 18, and I'm going to end it then. And then the next time I do this book, that will be the last video for this book. I will be through with it. So let me keep it moving. The defense called its own DNA expert to rebut Dr. Fisher's findings. Dr. William Shields, hey, hit the like button, please. That's not what it says. I just interjected that. Dr. William Shields, a professor at the State University of New York's College of Environmental Forestry, testified that 1 in every 33 samples of DNA could give a false exclusion or match. According to the current FBI database of 5,071 samples, this shared genetic sequence is found in less than 1% of Caucasians. While Fisher concluded that the DNA from the hair sample could be found in 1 out of 112 Caucasians, Shields estimated the sequence could be found in as many as 1 in 9. Detectives Bueller, Owen, Hendy, and Evers were the police witnesses. Hendy testified about collecting the hair from the pliers, but on cross-examination, Garagos tore into him, suggesting that sloppy police work or something more insidious had conspired to create additional evidence in the form of a second piece of hair. Yet it was again established to the court's satisfaction that the hair may have simply broken in two after it was removed from the pliers and placed in the evidence bag. At one point during the cross examination, when Harris objected to a question from Garagos as double speculation, Garagos retorted, like this entire case. The primary detective on the case, Al Brocchini, spent the better part of 3 days on the stand. After outlining the investigation timeline from December 24th forward, he responded to a line of accusatory questions posed by defense lawyer Kirk McAllister, who had not yet left Scott's defense team, trying to establish that Brocchini had rushed to judgment about Scott. He argued that Brocchini and other police officers didn't pursue leads that might have exonerated the defendant. Outside the courtroom, Lee and Jackie Peterson expressed their feelings about the police, in particular, their distaste for Detective Brocchini. "You should be ashamed," Jackie shouted when the detective passed. "I've seen bums before," Lee Peterson chimed in. The couple's aggression toward officers wasn't limited to the preliminary hearing. Even before Scott's arrest, police overheard Jackie Peterson making derogatory remarks about Al Brocchini in taped phone conversations with her son. In one conversation, she got very personal, impugning Brocchini's family, even his mother, in her comments. Oh, so she was roasting. All right, you old dead bitch, you. In court, Dr. Brian Peterson, the coroner who performed both autopsies, delivered his findings. Lacey's family chose to leave the courtroom during his testimony, fearing that it would be too difficult to hear. Through co-prosecutor Dave Harris's questioning, Dr. Peterson argued that Connor had not been born alive, as the defense would argue. He testified that Lacey's uterus had been intact when her body was submerged in the bay, and that the condition of the two bodies was dramatically different, leading Peterson to conclude that Connor had been sheltered in her womb until just before he was found. Under cross-examination, Garagos tried to elicit testimony that Connor was born alive and had taken a breath. Dr. Peterson responded that he could not rule out that possibility, but said it was unlikely based on his findings. And while being held in jail, Scott was reportedly shown the autopsy photos of Lacey and Connor. "She's got no fucking head," he reportedly cried out, breaking down in sobs. Really, nigga? The revelation that Lacey's body had trace amounts of caffeine also upset Scott, prompting him to exclaim, "They tortured her." What a fucking idiot, man. On November 18, Judge Girolami ruled that there was enough evidence to bind Scott over for trial. He was formally arraigned on December 3rd, 2003. His plea of not guilty came as no surprise, but Garagos' request for a trial date of January 26, 2004, less than 2 months away, came as a shock. On December 12, 2003, the defense filed for a motion for a change of venue. Scott could not receive a fair trial in his wife's hometown of Modesto, they contended, because of all of the pre-trial publicity, including 8,000 articles published worldwide, about 150 stories in local papers. On January 8th, the change of venue was granted. This pregnant woman went missing. Excuse me. The pregnant white woman goes missing. And there are 8,000 articles published worldwide. 8,000 articles worldwide. We are not talking just in California or even just within the United States. And about 150 stories in local papers. And there are missing Black people who have never garnered such attention. They can't even get 150 minutes in local news station reports, let alone articles, and 8,000 articles published worldwide. That's why I say, if you want to contribute or donate anything to Madam Whipass, please go to blackandmissing.org, or it's Google Black and Missing. It'll take you to the website, and please, you could donate $1, $2, $5, whatever the Lord places on your heart. Please donate there and tell them Madam Whipass sent you. Thank you. Girolami ruled that a jury could be found in one of 15 adjacent larger counties. While Geragos fought hard to move the trial to his home turf in Los Angeles, the case was finally sent to Redwood City in neighboring San Mateo County. In the weeks before the preliminary hearing, Geragos nearly lost control of the case. Scott was reportedly dissatisfied with his high-priced defense attorneys, expressing frustration that Geragos wasn't visiting him in jail and claiming that his questions weren't being addressed. Scott's parents had reportedly forked over the hefty $1 million retainer, and Scott wanted some pampering. My parents paid you $1 million. You should be pampering me. You should be doing whatever I want and whatever I say, because you got $1 million from my parents. In mid to late September, Scott went to the extent of signing a substitution agreement with another firm. The firm reportedly agreed to take Scott's case because the partners believed there was a viable defense and because it was winnable. When Geragos learned of the agreement, a member of the inner circle later revealed he went to the jail to confront Scott in person. He reportedly told Scott he would fry if he made the switch. And he also guaranteed Scott a victory. And according to sources, got Scott to sign another retainer agreement. Oh boy, that Mark Geragos. And after all of this, mind you, on the day that Scott had to stand in court to hear the jury's verdict, Mark Geragos was not standing by his side. His defense attorney, Mark Geragos, did not show up because he was busy with Michael Jackson's case. Mark Geragos didn't give a shit about Scott Peterson. He just liked the notoriety and the flat $1 million fee and all that. Please don't tell me you're concerned about your client. Of all days to be in court, the day that the verdict is read is one of those mandated days, one of those mandatory days that your presence be in court with your client. And he didn't show up. He had shit to do. In the months ahead, Lee and Jackie Peterson solicited funds from friends and family to help offset the cost of Scott's defense. The $1 million retainer had wiped them out, and Geragos would come back to them mid-trial asking for more money. And while several of Scott's siblings reached into their pockets to help, reportedly there was one family member who did not participate. While Scott's half-sister, Susan Cordillo, regularly went before the cameras defending her brother, she reportedly did not contribute to his defense fund. In another of the odd coincidences surrounding the case, I later learned that Cordillo was constructing an in-ground infinity pool in the backyard of her new home. Like Scott himself, she had failed to give to others while quietly arranging to sink her money into a lavish swimming pool, dumping tens of thousands of dollars into its construction. As Scott sat in jail, Susan threw a big party to unveil her brand new pool. So what? His sister had planned to install a pool. He decides to kill his wife and unborn child, and she must stop the plans of her life to assist her murdering bastard of a brother? Are you fucking kidding me? This makes her a bad person? It's obvious to a blind man Scott Peterson was guilty. And I'd go ahead with my pool installation plans too. Fuck out of here. Yeah, it was wasted money. I must commit to the defense fund of my murdering brother. I don't know. I just don't agree with that. But that concludes chapter 18. We got chapter 19 and chapter 20. 2 chapters, and then the acknowledgement page, which is 1 page. And then the rest are the black and white evidence files. And we are done with this. Then I can get back to Dope Fiend. We're nowhere near the end of that book, but it's not as long as this one. And then after that, I'm going to have to find that DeBarge book. All This Love, is that what it, Nia, what is that book? Was it Nia or, no, it wasn't Nia, it was somebody else who was making that request, but I'll find it. Whew. That's a lot to take in. Look up Jodi Arias. She is like the female version of Scott Peterson. Child. Sassy, you don't know. Oh, yeah, you have some idea about Jodi Arias. That was another case I was like fascinated with. I couldn't get enough of that case to save my life. Yeah, that Jodi Arias boy. Woo, that's one sick puppy. But you can't say that Travis was completely innocent, because he should have left her crazy ass alone. He knew that chick was batshit crazy, but he kept screwing her. Now, I ain't never been a man, but I keep hearing men say that crazy coochie is like the ultimate of coochie. It's a damn shame when, you're always thinking with the wrong head. Your head with the brain says crazy bitch, crazy bitch, crazy bitch. And your head without the brain says fuck the bitch, fuck the bitch, fuck the bitch. Decisions, decisions. Oh, I do have a super chat, but it's not really set up. Did it go through? I don't know. I don't think it went through because it's not really set up. But yeah. I did a couple of videos about Jodi Arias. It's on this channel. You can type in YouTube, search Madam Whip Ass Jodi Arias. Yeah, man, I'll tell the whole story of that crazy one. I always wonder, what is she doing in prison now? Damn shame. Manipulating people, for one. She's highly manipulative. Highly manipulative. I can't imagine that that's your life in prison with a whole bunch of fish-smelling bitches, day in and day out. Same shit every day. They feed you slop. You know? They got the TV on, but they refuse to turn up the volume, so you can't hear it because people are chattering. I just couldn't do it. Oh, Susan Smith. Oh, lying ass. I didn't understand that with her and her 2 kids. I mean, shoot, she could have just took them to her parents and said, look, I don't want to be a mother anymore, and dealt with their mouth or whatever. But the choice she made, good Lord. Mm. It did. It went through. Wow. Hold on. Let me see. What am I looking at? That's not what I'm looking at. Yeah, this is on YouTube. We shall see. You sent me $10? Nia, you know what? Bless your heart. Girl, you are the first super chat ever I have received. Ever. Yay! I'm going to send it to, what is it called? Black and Missing. Matter of fact, since I'm on this, let me go to the link and show it to you. Black and Missing. I got a $10 super chat. Well, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord. Woo! Since I can go live, here it goes. Hold on. Screen share. We want this. This is it. It is blackandmissinginc.com. Blackandmissinginc.com. See all these black and missing people? You never think black people go missing. Missing since 2010, 2009, 2006, 1995, still haven't been found. Robert Lee Webb, Lori Ann Boffman, Taiwan Smith, Taffy G. Overstreet. And here's where you can donate. You can donate $5, $10, whatever. If you can leave a comment when you donate, just say Madam Whip Ass has a YouTube channel, and she said, come and donate. About Us Black and Missing Foundation, Inc., BAMFI, has been established as a nonprofit organization whose mission is to bring awareness to missing persons of color, provide vital resources and tools to missing persons' families and friends, and to educate the minority community on personal safety. Let me pause right there. Remember when Wendy Williams made that stupid ass statement on her show? Why do we have historically black colleges and foundations with the word, black foundations? She said, I would have a problem if we had white foundations. Why do we have to have black foundations? This is why we have things like Black and Missing Foundation, Inc., BAMFI, because you would think that black people do not share the same plight as white people, i.e., going missing. You would think only pretty white women go missing in the United States. I'll have you know that ugly white women go missing too, but you don't hear about those bitches either. If you're not a pretty white woman, nobody gives a damn. So that's why we have things like Black and Missing Foundation, Inc. Wendy, founded in 2008 by veteran law enforcement official and public relations specialists, BAMFI will create public awareness campaigns for public safety and provide parents and loved ones of missing persons with a forum for spreading the word of their disappearance with pictures and profiles of missing individuals. BAMFI will use a variety of media, including print, television, and the internet, to help locate missing persons of color for this severely underserved population. BAMFI is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. Here are the executives: Derica N. Wilson, co-founder, president, and CEO; Natalie Wilson, co-founder and chief operations officer; Candace L. Green, writer, editor; and Brandy Martin. They have seminars and workshops, all types of stuff. So when you get a chance, take your time and go through the website. And every now and then, when you can, donate it. Because Wendy's an asshole sometimes, sassy. So anyway, it is time for me to go. Thank you. For stopping by and tuning in. And maybe I'll come back in a little bit and we can chit chat about some things. All right? Time for me to go. Peace.